Hi, I'm Teresa, and I never imagined I'd have to share this experience. I was just an ordinary woman, living my everyday life, working hard and caring for my family, until everything flipped on October 3rd, 2023. That day became the moment I truly died. For several minutes, I was absent from life, and in that gap, I witnessed something beyond our world, a sight that still shakes me to my very core. I encountered Jesus, and what he revealed about the spiritual deceptions pervading our world, especially regarding race, left me utterly speechless. I have to tell you this because the truth waits for no one. That October morning began just like any other day. I woke up early, stretched out, and thanked God for another day. The sun peeked through my window, bathing my room in a gentle golden light, making it feel like a regular Tuesday. I slipped into my navy blue work uniform and headed to the kitchen, where the aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. My routine was simple: coffee, breakfast, and then out the door to work at the senior living facility where I cared for others. I always cherished looking after the elderly. Their wisdom, their stories, and their unique outlook on life meant so much to me. That morning, my schedule was full. I visited Miss Johnson, who always had a new tale from her younger days, and Mr. Ray, whose soft humming of classic gospel hymns brought comfort. It was a calm, ordinary day, and I had no idea that within hours, my life would be irrevocably altered. By the evening, I was exhausted. My shift had ended, and I was eager to get home. Earlier, my son had called asking if I could pick up some of his favorite cornbread, so I made a quick stop at the bakery, grabbed the bread, and set off on my drive home. A light rain had started falling, but I wasn't worried. I'd driven in the rain many times before. I switched on my favorite gospel station and softly sang along as I navigated the familiar road. Then, out of nowhere, everything changed. One moment, I was driving, hands firmly on the wheel, thinking about dinner and a good rest. The next, blinding headlights exploded in front of me. A truck, skidding on the wet pavement, was barreling straight toward me. My heart pounded as I instinctively tried to swerve, but it was too late. The collision was brutal. Metal crumpled, glass shattered, and a deafening crash filled my ears. I felt my body lurch forward, the seatbelt biting into my chest, and then everything slipped into darkness. I don't remember any pain. I don't recall screaming, just an overwhelming void and silence. There was neither pain nor panic, just an immense emptiness. Oddly, I wasn't frightened. I soon realized I wasn't even in my car anymore. I discovered I wasn't in my body at all. Looking down, I saw myself lying lifeless amid the wreckage, a shattered windshield, raindrops moving in slow motion, and the red and blue flashing lights of the ambulance arriving. The strangest part was that I felt almost weightless, floating, not in any earthly sense, without gravity or direction. I simply existed, observing the paramedics as they rushed to help. I watched their anxious faces and frantic movements as they tried to free me from the mangled metal. One young paramedic with dark hair and worried eyes called out, "Teresa, can you hear me?" I longed to answer, but my voice was silent. It felt as if my voice no longer belonged to me. I attempted to move, yet I had no control. I was detached from my body entirely. As I hovered above the chaos, I noticed something extraordinary. Everything appeared clearer and brighter. Details I'd never seen before stood out. Raindrops shimmered like tiny diamonds. The grass swayed in the gentle breeze, and there was a subtle living glow all around. Then I saw my mother, who had passed away 5 years earlier, standing by the ambulance, silently watching the scene with a peaceful expression. Her loving eyes told me everything. I was dead. That realization, which should have instilled terror, instead filled me with a deep, unexpected calm. It felt as if I'd stepped outside of time. The fear, stress, and all the worldly worries simply vanished. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't like the harsh beams of the truck or the ambulance's flashing signals. This light was alive. It radiated from everywhere and nowhere, warm and inviting like a long-lost friend, calling me forward. I felt an irresistible pull toward it. As I drifted closer, an immense love filled every fiber of my being. It was like coming into the arms of someone who had known me all along, waiting patiently for my return. Then I heard a voice. "Teresa, come." In that moment, I knew who it was, Jesus. The sound of his voice changed everything. No longer was I simply adrift. I was drawn steadily toward the light. There was no fear or resistance, only the comfort of returning home after years of being lost. The warmth, the love, the overwhelming peace, nothing on earth could compare. As I approached, I felt a purity that washed over me, as if every burden, mistake, and regret was being gently lifted away. The light wasn't merely bright, it pulsed with life. It wasn't just around me, it filled me from within. Even before I saw him, I knew who awaited me. Jesus. I needed no introduction or proof. Deep in my soul, I recognized him immediately. His presence was so overpowering, I could scarcely absorb it. It felt like standing before the sun. But instead of burning, his light healed every part of me, filling voids I'd never known existed. I fell to my knees, if I even had knees in this form, as a natural gesture of reverence, not out of fear, but out of profound love, awe, and respect for his divine power. Then he spoke again. "Teresa, rise." I obeyed, and for the first time I saw his face clearly. How can I describe it? His beauty defied words. His eyes held the depth of eternity, making me feel like a child gazing at an endless sky. Radiating from him was a love so vast and deep that it completed me. Yet there was also a trace of sorrow in his gaze. I couldn't understand why Jesus, the King of Kings and Prince of Peace, would carry such sorrow. But before I could ask, he reached out his hand. The moment his fingers touched mine, a surge of understanding overwhelmed me. I saw everything, not just the world as it appears, but as he truly sees it. I witnessed the pain, the deception, and the subtle forces that manipulated people into dividing themselves. I saw a battle waged not with flesh and blood, but a spiritual war raging across the globe, one in which most remained unaware. Tears filled my eyes. "Lord, what is happening?" I whispered. Jesus looked at me with deep sadness, yet his voice remained steady. "Come, Teresa." Before I could fully comprehend, everything shifted. A tunnel of light unfurled before me, and suddenly I was moving through it effortlessly, neither walking nor flying, but carried along gently. The light wasn't just around me, it flowed through me, filling me with an energy and warmth I'd never experienced. In the distance, I began to hear music, but it wasn't the kind of music we know on earth. It was pure, vibrant, and alive. Harmonious voices blended together, singing words I couldn't understand, but somehow felt deep within me. Then I noticed something incredible. The tunnel's walls weren't solid at all. They were filled with moving images. Each image portrayed moments from my life, but I wasn't seeing them as I remembered. I was viewing them through Jesus's eyes. I saw myself as a lonely child on a playground. I had always believed I was just another kid, unnoticed by others. Yet in that vision, angels stood beside me. Even during my solitary moments, I had never truly been alone. I witnessed forgotten memories, times when I offered a kind word to a stranger, moments when I forgave someone who hurt me, and instances when I prayed quietly for those who never knew. Every act, every choice resonated into eternity. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the impact of every decision. Lord, I had no idea, I murmured. Jesus smiled gently, though his expression remained solemn. Every choice has weight, Teresa. Every thought, every word, every action matters. Then the tunnel shifted again, and suddenly I wasn't looking back at my past. I was peering into the future. The glowing light dimmed, and I found myself standing on what seemed like an ordinary city street. People walked by, absorbed in their daily routines, and nothing appeared out of the ordinary at first. Then I noticed something unsettling. No one was talking to one another. Instead, people moved along with their eyes fixed on small glowing devices implanted under their skin. Payments occurred without cash or cards, just a simple gesture over sensors. Families gathered in restaurants, yet instead of conversing, they gazed emptily ahead, as if steered by an unseen force. My heart pounded as I looked to Jesus. I whispered, What is this? His eyes, filled with sorrow, answered without words. This is what comes next. Standing there, absorbing the eerie, silent world unfolding around me, I turned back to him. His gaze held a profound sadness, blended with unwavering love. Teresa, you must grasp what is happening, he said. I yearned to ask countless questions, but before I could speak, our surroundings shifted once more. In an instant, I was no longer in the city. I found myself in a place more tangible than anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't heaven, at least not yet. Still, it pulsed with divine presence. The air felt alive, carrying an indescribable scent, a blend of purity, love, and holiness interwoven into one. There was no sun, yet light filled every corner, emanating from a solitary source far off. Then he stepped forward. Though I had sensed his presence before, now I saw him completely. Jesus. His robes were brilliantly white, unlike any earthly fabric, shimmering as if woven from light itself. His face was both intimately familiar and beyond description. In his eyes swirled vast oceans of wisdom, a fierce righteousness, and a love so deep I felt ready to dissolve within it. I sank to my knees instantly, not out of force, but because my soul recognized him, leaving me no choice but to worship. Every fiber of my being acknowledged him, not only as my Savior, but as the very reason for my existence. His voice was at once commanding and tender, exuding authority and overflowing with compassion. Rise, Teresa. I have much to show you. He reached out, and when his hand touched me, waves of love and truth cascaded through me, every fear, every doubt, every hidden wound laid bare. He saw it all, yet his love remained steadfast. Lord, why have you brought me here? I finally murmured. He met my eyes with a grave look. Because the world is under deception, and you must witness the truth before it's too late. The moment those words fell from his lips, everything shifted again. The light around us transformed, and suddenly we were no longer enveloped in divine presence. Instead, I began to see the world, not as we perceive it physically, but through spiritual eyes. I saw entire cities shrouded in a thick, dark haze, a mist invisible to most. This darkness wasn't a mere absence of light, it was a living, crawling force wrapping itself around nations, governments, and even churches. This is the deception, Teresa, Jesus said. I watched in dismay as people carried on with their lives, scrolling through phones, working, raising their children, unaware that something was subtly guiding their thoughts and emotions. Then my attention turned to a worldwide trend, a technology rapidly becoming indispensable. I witnessed individuals receiving implants, tiny, glowing devices embedded under their skin. These were not ordinary microchips. They were spiritual chains, disguised as convenience. "This is how the world is being prepared," Jesus stated solemnly. I saw pastors at their pulpits assuring congregations that these new technologies were blessings, a divine provision for a safer, better future. Christians eagerly embraced them, convinced it was simply a modern way to connect. Turning to Jesus with a broken heart, I pleaded, "Lord, don't they see it?" He shook his head. "No, because they never seek me. They trust the wisdom of the world over mine." I longed to shout, to rouse them, to warn them, but I was powerless. This was merely a vision, a warning he was revealing to me. "Come, Teresa," he urged. "There is more." At first I couldn't fathom where he was leading me next. The vision shifted again, and I observed people of every race and color moving through life, burdened by deep, unrecognized divisions. I saw black individuals carrying generational pain, anger, and resentment without knowing its source, and white people weighed down by shame, confusion, and guilt as they struggled to find their place. Then Jesus spoke words that struck me deeply. "Do you see? They are not enemies. They are all my children." I gasped as the spiritual truth unfolded. The divide between black and white was not natural. It was engineered. I witnessed dark forces whispering lies to both groups, distorting history, magnifying wounds, and using pain as a weapon. To black people, the enemy murmured, "You're unvalued. You will always be seen as less. Cling to your anger and never forgive." To white people it hissed, "You bear all the blame. You're condemned by birth, and nothing you do will ever make up for the past." And both sides believed the lie. Jesus turned to me, his voice urgent yet filled with love. "The enemy twists history to keep them blind, but I have come to set them free. There is no black, no white, only my people." Tears streamed down my face as I saw spiritual chains wrapping around minds. It was never truly about race. It was always about control. In that moment, I understood the sorrow in his eyes. People were so busy fighting among themselves that they missed the real battle overhead. "Teresa, this deception runs deep and many will be lost because of it." I fell to my knees and asked, "Lord, what can we do?" Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. "Speak the truth. Some will listen, some will not. But the truth must be proclaimed." I could barely breathe from the enormity of what I had seen. The division, the deception, the enemy's distortion. It was overwhelming. My soul trembled as I asked, "Lord, how did we let this happen?" His gaze, filled with profound love and sorrow, broke my spirit as he replied, "Teresa, my people have forgotten who they are." In that instant, clarity surged through me. The enemy had not merely split people by race or lies. He had stolen their very identity. I saw individuals drifting through life, chasing fleeting validations, money, power, or approval, never realizing they were meant for something far greater. Then, in a sudden flash, I was transported to a vast hall filled with souls, not physical bodies, but radiant beings of light, brimming with potential and promise. "These are those yet to be born," Jesus explained. "Each is sent with a purpose, endowed with gifts to fulfill their calling. But when they enter this world, the enemy sets his plan in motion, confusing, weakening, and distracting them, so they forget why they were sent." I watched as these pure souls arrived on earth, and from the moment of their birth, the battle for their identity and destiny began. Some were brought up in nurturing homes where they were cherished and gently steered toward their divine destiny. Others, however, were derailed by fractured families, addictions, or deep-seated pain that made them doubt their own worth. Society, too, had its way of twisting minds, making some believe that their value depended solely on their looks, intellect, or accomplishments. The adversary had built an entire network to prevent people from fulfilling the unique purpose God placed within them. I looked to Jesus, my heart aching, and asked, "Lord, how do we fight this? How do we awaken their eyes?" He grasped my hands and replied, "Tell them who they truly are. Tell them the reason they were created, and most importantly, remind them that I have not forgotten about them." Then he revealed something that sparked hope in me. Amid all the deceit, I witnessed sparks of light emerging from certain souls, people who had discovered their purpose and refused to be dominated by the enemy's falsehoods. These were everyday individuals, teachers, mothers, fathers, laborers, students, pastors, and leaders, all carried a radiance that pushed back the surrounding darkness. "These are my warriors," Jesus declared. "They don't need swords or conventional weapons. Their power lies in truth." The more they spoke honestly, the more the invisible chains around others fell away. The enemy could never overcome them, for truth is mightier than any lie. I gazed at Jesus. My soul ignited with urgency. "I have to go back, don't I?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes, Teresa. But first, there is one final vision I must share with you." The moment he uttered those words, our surroundings shifted once again. Though the comforting warmth of his presence remained, what I saw next shook me to the very core. I found myself standing in a sprawling metropolis, larger than anything I'd ever known. Yet, something was off. The architecture was sleek and modern, dominated by luminous screens. The streets were eerily quiet, despite thousands of people moving along in unison. There were no vehicles, only pedestrians walking in perfect order, their faces blank, eyes fixed on unseen data streaming before them. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding. "Lord, what is this?" His face was laden with sorrow as he replied, "This is the future of the world if they do not awaken." I watched in disbelief as people went about their routines like automatons. They worked, they dined, they shopped, but something essential was missing. No laughter echoed, no tears fell, no one dared to question. Then my eyes were drawn upward, toward the source of control hovering over the city. A gigantic hologram of a charismatic leader dominated towering screens. He was articulate, and people revered him with admiration and devotion. "This is the one the world will follow," Jesus said. "The one they will trust. Yet they won't notice the chains he fastens upon them until it's too late." I observed governments preaching unity, safety, and peace, but behind their polished words lurked something sinister. People were willingly surrendering their freedoms, convinced they were improving the world. And then I saw something that made my heart falter. Massive crowds lined up, stepping forward to receive something. At first I couldn't discern what it was, but as I drew closer, my heart sank. They were being given an upgrade, a tiny implant placed just beneath their skin. I turned to Jesus, shocked. "Lord, is this the mark?" He shook his head. "Not yet. But this is the path they will be guided down, step by deceptive step. First they'll be told it's convenient. Then they'll be persuaded it's necessary, and finally it will be imposed as mandatory." Tears filled my eyes. I longed to scream, to warn them, to implore them to stop, but they were too entranced, too misled, too eager to trust the system. In desperation I asked, "Lord, how do we stop this?" His voice, a blend of sorrow and hope, answered numb. "Some will listen, some will not. But those who recognize my voice will not be deceived. You must speak to them, warn them before it's too late." With those words, everything shifted once more. I suddenly found myself in an open field. The city and its towering screens had vanished, leaving only profound silence. Jesus stood beside me, gazing out over the horizon. I could feel the weight of what he had revealed pressing upon my soul. Teresa, the world has forgotten the power of choice. They see themselves as mere victims of circumstance, but I granted them free will, the greatest gift of all. And yet so many choose the path of destruction. I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. But Lord, they don't know. They can't see it. How can they choose when they're unaware of the deception? Jesus answered softly yet firmly. That is why my people must speak out, why truth must ring louder than falsehood. In that moment, two paths appeared before me. One was broad, smooth, and inviting. People walked it without a second thought. Yet as they advanced, I saw darkness engulfing them, unaware that they were being led toward ruin. The other path was narrow and rugged, riddled with obstacles and trials. But at its end, there was brilliant light, and Jesus was there, arms wide open. Most will opt for the easy route, Teresa. It is comfortable, safe, and requires no sacrifice. But those who seek me, who truly trust me, will choose the harder road, and I will guide them home. I trembled as I asked, what do I do? How can I help them see? He placed his hand on my shoulder, and I felt his love flood over me. Tell them the truth, Teresa. Some will turn away. Some will mock you. But those who belong to me will heed my voice. And when the moment comes, they will know which path to follow. In a blink, I was no longer in that vision. I was back in the presence of Jesus, the weight of all I had seen still heavy on my soul. Yet now, I also felt hope. Jesus looked at me steadily and said, there are those already awake, Teresa. The enemy cannot deceive them because they recognize my voice. They are the ones I have chosen to stand firm. In these final days, I have seen pockets of light scattered across the globe, people who refuse to conform, who hold fast to me despite the surrounding deceit. I've seen them praying, worshipping, encouraging one another, and warning those willing to listen. I realized they are unafraid. Even as darkness encroaches, they remain steadfast. These, my warriors, are not armed with swords or violence, but with truth. And when the world turns against them, I will be their shield. Tears welled in my eyes as I beheld not just suffering and deception, but also the strength of those who stood with Jesus. They were not powerful by worldly standards. Many were simple, everyday individuals, mothers, fathers, workers, students, yet in the spiritual realm, they shone like the stars. Jesus fixed his gaze on me, full of purpose, and said, go back, Teresa. Tell them what you have seen. Those who are mine will listen. I felt a tug, as if something were drawing me back. I looked at Jesus, my heart breaking. Lord, I don't want to leave. I want to stay with you. He smiled gently, though his eyes were grave. Your time is not yet over. There are many who need to hear this, Teresa. They must know the truth before it's too late. The pull grew stronger, and suddenly I felt myself being drawn away from the light. Everything went dark. I felt the return of my body, the ache in my limbs, the sound of machines beeping. Then I gasped for air. I was back in the hospital. My eyes fluttered open to see my family gathered around, their faces etched with shock. I was alive, and I knew beyond a doubt that I had to share what Jesus had shown me. Taking my first breath in my restored body felt strange, like being confined to something too small, too limiting. The weight of flesh, the throbbing in my limbs, the steady beep of hospital machines, all was overwhelming. I saw the faces of my loved ones hovering over me, tears streaming down their cheeks in a mix of shock and relief. My sister clutched my hand, whispering my name repeatedly, as if repetition would anchor me here. The doctors had warned they might lose me. My injuries were dire. But God had other plans. As I acclimated to being back, vivid memories of what I had seen surged through me. The futuristic city, the pervasive deception, the enemy's hold over humanity, it was all etched into my spirit. Yet when I looked into the eyes of my family, I realized something chilling. They were oblivious. They'd been living their lives, completely unaware of the spiritual war raging above them. Tears welled in my eyes. "I have to tell them," I murmured. My sister leaned in, asking, "Tell us what?" I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. My body was weak, yet inside burned an unyielding urgency. Jesus had sent me back for a reason. I wasn't meant to keep this to myself. I closed my eyes and prayed, "Lord, give me the strength to share what you have shown me." The steady beep of machines reminded me that I'd been granted a second chance, not for my own sake, but for theirs. In the days that followed, I struggled to explain what had happened, but most people doubted me. My sister assumed I was confused by the accident. My pastor advised caution, saying near-death experiences were profound but should not scare people. Even some of my closest friends dismissed it as just a dream. I felt isolated, burdened by a truth too heavy to bear alone. Yet, deep down, I knew silence was not an option. Jesus had warned me that not everyone would listen. Then I began noticing something uncanny. The visions I had seen were beginning to unfold in real life. News reports mentioned implantable technology for transactions, digital ID systems replacing traditional banking, and even churches embracing AI and tech, convinced it was nothing more than progress. I knew time was short, so I started speaking to anyone who would listen. Some dismissed me, but others felt it too. They had observed the changes, sensed the shift in the world, yet lacked the words till I spoke. In that moment, I realized I was not alone. God was already stirring hearts. I was merely his messenger. The hardest part was watching loved ones choose to ignore the truth as the deception grew ever stronger each day. But I knew I had done my part. I had spoken the truth, just as Jesus had instructed. Some will listen, some will not. If you've read this far, know that you were meant to hear it. This isn't solely my story. It's a warning. Jesus didn't show me these things to frighten me, but so that I might warn you. The world is shifting, and the deception is already at work. The enemy isn't coming with overt chains and brute force. He arrives cloaked in convenience and comfort. At first, it may appear harmless, even logical. Then it becomes necessary, and ultimately it will be imposed. I implore you, remain vigilant. Pray for discernment. Strengthen your faith now, before it's too late. Jesus showed me that his people will be safeguarded. No matter how dark the world becomes, his light will shine ever brighter. But you must be willing to see the truth, to choose him even when it's hard. Even if the world calls you crazy, even if it means taking the tougher road, because ultimately the only thing that matters is your soul. And Jesus, he has already won the battle. Now the choice is yours. Will you listen or wait until it's too late? I've done my part. Now the choice is yours.